Hey, how you doing? Well, we are 3 weeks into June now. It's Pride Month. I'll bet you're seeing pride flags everywhere. I wonder if you've ever asked why the month of June and how did all this get started? Well, I want to talk about three reasons Pride Month began, and I want to talk about what those reasons mean to us today. First, though, if you are enjoying this podcast and you've visited us a few times, won't you think about subscribing? I'd love to have you be part of this community. I'd like to stay in touch with you, keep you abreast of different things we've got coming up. Well, I'd like to have you join us. We're a community of believers trying to keep up with challenges that cancel culture throws us, and we're wanting to meet those challenges in a biblical way. That sounds good to you? Hit that subscribe button. In the comments section, would you let me know you did? I want to thank you personally for that, okay? Okay, Pride Month. How did it all begin? Okay, well, we know homosexuality. I mean, that's always existed. There's always been a homosexual population that's just made up of anybody who is attracted sexually to the same sex. But the pro homosexual movement, that's a relatively new thing. Now, in June of 1969, that movement got galvanized. But before that, there was a movement of sorts, much quieter. For example, the Mattachine Society was founded in 1951. That was a society for homosexual men. The name Mattachine was taken from a name that was given a medieval group of French dancers who wore masks and basically mocked convention. 1951, that group was organized to help develop support among homosexual men and eventually to even do some degree of lobbying for pro homosexual causes. Few years later, 1955, the Daughters of Bilitis was formed. In an ancient poem, Bilitis was a romantic partner of the woman Sappho for essentially the same reasons as the Mattachine Society. And these were essentially secret societies with some limited visibility. But there really wasn't an openly pro homosexual presence confronting the system, which at that time, of course, was not at all what we would call gay friendly. Well, all of that changed in June 1969, on June 28th, in the early morning hours. In those early morning hours, police raided the Stonewall Inn. That was a gay bar in Greenwich Village, New York City. They began arresting people. Eventually, about 13 people were arrested. Some of them employees for selling liquor without a license, and also some people for cross dressing, which was against the law at that time. Now, according to some accounts, one officer in particular got rough with one of the lesbians that he was escorting into the van. And as she was sort of pushed and shoved by the guy, she shouted at a crowd that had gathered in front of the bar, saying something like resist or don't put up with this. Well, that sparked a flame. The people there in that crowd that had gathered in the front of the bar watching these arrests, they started throwing coins, bottles, cans, whatever, and it got more and more violent. Eventually, the arresting officers literally barricaded themselves inside the bar, and some people actually tried to set the bar on fire. That's how hot, literally, things were getting. Now, that protest actually spread over the next 5 days as thousands of people took to the streets in the Greenwich Village area. Well, that was quite an event. That's when basically, as a population, homosexuals in that area were saying we're going to fight back if we feel we're being mistreated. Now, 1 year later, the June of 1970, an event was held commemorating that protest, and that was the beginning of what we now call Pride Month, a monthly commemoration of the Stonewall Uprising. That's what happened. Now, let's look at why it happened because that's significant to us here in 2023. Three reasons that I would say it happened: repression, rebellion, revolution. Repression, rebellion, revolution. Let's look first at repression. The dictionary defines repression as the action of subduing someone or something by force. That's repression, the action of subduing someone or something by force. Now, it's undeniable that there was a high degree of repression of homosexual people at that time. In America of 1969, homosexual acts were illegal. You could be arrested if you were found committing one of them, if you were engaged in a homosexual act. Psychiatry certainly became a form of repression against gay and lesbian people. They could be forced into treatment even against their will. Blackmailing was another form of repression. You could be forced into making payments to somebody because at that time you could lose your job, you could lose your family, you could lose your reputation, you could even lose your life if people realized that you were a homosexual. Violence with approval was another form of repression. And believe me, there was such a thing as, culturally approved gay bashing. You could be assaulted, and some people would consider that to be something you deserved. I know this firsthand. I was an active part of the gay community from 1978 to 1984. Even before that, I realized I was attracted to men. And I remember having a girlfriend in high school whose dad was laughing as he was telling me about how he heard a gay man down the street getting jumped and screaming for help. And his wife said, "Hey, we ought to call the police to help the guy." And the guy looked at me and winked and laughed and said, "I didn't call the police. Why should I ask for help for that guy? I was glad he was getting beat up." I remember, my gosh, when I would go to bars as a young adult, gay bars, you could get arrested for lewd conduct just by putting your hand on another guy's shoulder. If there was a vice officer in there you go. And, people didn't fight back in those days, even because in so many cases, they were still afraid of exposure. I remember speaking at college campuses when I was more of a gay activist and talking about how I was gay and proud and so forth, and hearing students say to me in front of the whole class, "Too bad you don't live in a country where you'd be put to death for that, you pervert." Now that was, business as usual. So I know that this kind of repression has been going on, and I know it historically and I knew it experientially. Now, a group's violent reaction is often sparked by prior repression. A group's violent reaction is often sparked by prior repression. Think, for example, of the French Revolution. There's a pretty good example and not a bad parallel to a lot of what we're seeing today. The underclass in France was taxed mercilessly. They were oppressed and repressed by the aristocrats. They were ignored by royalty. They were largely impoverished and absolutely despairing. That was a repressed group. There was a prior repression prior to the French Revolution, and then there was a violent reaction. Now, you and I know a repressed group is not necessarily a sinless group. When I talk about repression of homosexual people, that's no legitimization of homosexuality. Homosexuality is wrong. It's nothing God ever intended. But that does not justify the repression of homosexual people. The repression does not justify the sin. The sin does not justify the repression. Well, the levels of repression homosexuals experienced produced two things that night. One was a rage that was ready to explode, and then eventual and ongoing public sympathy as well. Now, that's true. The philosopher Edwin Howe said, "Abuse a man unjustly, and you will make friends for him." Think about that. We're still dealing with it today. The rage that was ready to explode that night is still expressed and experienced among a lot of gays and lesbians and transgender people. And there is ongoing public sympathy based on those past abuses. That rage has been handed down from generation to generation. Is the rage legitimate today the way it was back in 1969? Not on your life. But that hasn't stopped it from being handed down. That's an essential part of pro gay identity. And the sympathy has also been handed down from generation to generation because as we speak, it is largely assumed culturally that lesbians and gays and transgender people are victims solely because they are lesbian, gay, or transgender. Well, that rage we're talking about, it morphed into rebellion, full blown rebellion. Interesting point Martin Luther King Jr. made about that. He said, "Have you any idea how much tyrants fear the people they oppress? All of them realize that one day, amongst their many victims, there is sure to be one that rises against them and strikes back." Now, hold the phone. I am not comparing the gay rights movement to the civil rights movement. Those are two entirely different things, entirely different populations, entirely different causes. One was and remains entirely just. One is not. I get that. And I'm certainly not going to compare the struggle of African Americans to the struggles of lesbians and gays. Those are two entirely different experiences. There is just, for example, no sin whatsoever in being a person of color. There is a great sin in practicing something that God calls a perversion. But one degree of similarity exists, and that's the degree of tyranny and the eventual uprising. Um, this is a little similar to, again, getting back to the French Revolution. When the French underclass stormed the Bastille, they basically said enough is enough, and that rage morphed into rebellion. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Initially, that rebellion looked like a good thing, seemed justified. It was an attempt to overthrow tyranny. But the movement was birthed by injustice, true, and then fueled by rage over the injustice. Here's the kicker. Even if the injustice got corrected, the movement needed the rage to keep it going. Now, that rage helped shift that temporary rebellion into an ongoing revolution. Let me say that again a little less clumsily. That rage helped shift a temporary rebellion into an ongoing revolution. And that revolution became pretty bloodthirsty, didn't it? Even after the underclass had basically overthrown the structure that was keeping them repressed, enough was never enough. In Dickens' account of the French Revolution, A Tale of Two Cities, one of his characters, Madame Defarge, was a bloodthirsty woman because of the injustices she and her family had suffered. And at one point, her husband warned her, "I think you're going too far." She said, "Hey, in light of everything I've been through, quote, tell the wind and the fire where to stop, but don't tell me." Hey, that could be a mantra of what we're hearing from a lot of lesbian, gays, and transgender people today. There's a similarity to the ongoing push we see in that movement. And here's how. The Pride movement, basically the politicized gay rights movement, has a twofold agenda: normalize homosexuality or transgender, and silence opposition to that normalization. And there's been a societal shift to put pressure on the church to do that very thing, either normalize it or be silent about it. Well, the evidence for that is so open, so verifiable, we don't need to belabor that. Here's the bottom line. Gay people are not our enemy. They should be welcomed. They should be engaged. I mean, even Jesus would engage a Pharisee, although the Pharisees were largely hostile to him. The gay people, they are not our enemy. But the gay rights politicized movement, yeah, that is an enemy of the truth, and it should be resisted. Of course it should be. So the response to all of this, when we look at the month of Pride in June, and we're looking at the celebration of homosexuality and the demand that you either affirm it or be silenced if you don't, threefold response. Withstand the movement. Welcome the people. Watch what happens. Withstand the movement because we must. We need to speak prophetically to the culture that no, this is not what our God intended. The movement has become unjust in making demands of people that are not fair, and the movement is celebrating something that our Creator never intended to be. We speak prophetically. We withstand the movement. But we welcome the people, whosoever will may come. Absolutely. And then we watch what happens. I'll be the first to say, and it's not hyperbole, it's true, it's accurate. Horrible things are happening in the name of LGBTQ rights. Horrible things are happening under the banner of LGBTQ rights. But there is a harvest coming out of that horror. There is. There are and there will always be people who will reach a point where they realize this is not what God intended, this is not what I want, I renounce it. So Jesus said, pray the Lord of the harvest that he will send laborers. I would say, pray the Lord of the harvest that he will send laborers into this population that is so lost and whose minds have been so darkened. Pray the Lord will send laborers. And while you're at it, accept the challenge to be one of those laborers, okay? It's good talking with you. If you would like to support this work, we'd love to offer free content. We hope that it's edifying to you and to the church at large. Just go to joedallas.com/giving. That'll show you how you can support Cloudfire Ministries so we can go on doing what we do. Well, this is Christians in a Cancel Culture. We're here every Friday, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you for being here. God bless you.